Welcome, first of all, to our public lecture, Popular Chinese Woodblock Prints, Folk Art, Gods and Propaganda. This is part of our special exhibition lecture series for our exhibition we just launched last Friday, Nian Hua of Deities, Guardians and Auspicious Arts. So today we have with us David Leffman, and he'll be talking about, so we've referenced sort of the variety of New Year prints, so including dog gods, talismans, paper horse or Duma, deity prints, and 19th century prints also with political messages, all from our speaker's collection. This public talk will examine the hidden meanings and social commentary, history and folklore behind each of these prints, and how and where they were collected, and the challenges faced by the remaining printing centers and craftsmen in China. So David Leffman first visited China in 1985 and has been back and forth ever since as a freelance travel writer and also a photographer. So he bought his first Chinese Woodblock prints in the 1990s and has since collected hundreds more. He enjoys investigating why the prints were made and also to gain insight into the broader aspects of traditional Chinese culture, such as religion, history, literature, and folklore. So without further ado, let David introduce himself to you guys, and we can go into the lecture proper. Thank you.
Hi everyone. Hope you can see me there. Very early good morning from the UK here. I just like to thank you all for joining this talk today on popular Chinese woodblock prints, and also many thanks to everybody at the National Heritage Board in Singapore for firstly inviting me and secondly setting all this up. I'm just going to rehash that little introduction there. I first became interested in woodblock printing while I was still at school. I saw an exhibition of Japanese prints at the local museum, and I was so inspired by them, really, by their art and the craftsmanship involved, that I actually taught myself how to make woodblock prints and how to print them while I was still at school. And then, as you heard, I worked in China sort of on and off for many years as a travel writer. And of course, I traveled. I got around the country a lot. And I was at a New Year market at Guangzhou in the mid-1990s when I came across these two. Hang on. Yeah, these two prints. And these are of the door gods Yangun and Zhao Guangyin. These were the very first woodblock prints, Chinese woodblock prints I ever bought. They're very heavy orange background, particularly the style in general, as I found out later, very typical of the southern Chinese woodblock printing studios of Fujian and Guangdong. And in fact, these two were made not very far from where I bought them at a place called Foshan, which I'm sure some of you know already, but we'll get onto that later. Over the years, I've collected prints wherever I found them, both in China and the UK or overseas. And as you heard, they've been something for me of a window into Chinese culture, many aspects of Chinese culture. And also from talking to woodblock printers in China over the years, I've realized that this is very much an endangered craft, vanishing art, really. The older generation that still have all the skills, they're finding it very difficult to find younger apprentices to hand these skills onto. As you'll hear later, it's not a very profitable career. So I hope that by sharing some of my collection with you today, it'll do a little bit to spread the word about Chinese woodblock prints and why the craft is really worth preserving. So before we get on to many more of my prints, I'll just go over some of the basics and most importantly of all, what is a woodblock print? Well, woodblock printing is a way of mass producing a design, a picture or a text. You draw your design on a piece of paper, a thin piece of paper, and then you need obviously a woodblock, which is just a plank of wood, really. It's the right size for your print. In China, they like to use pear wood because it's got a very, very fine grain, but lots of other types of wood are used as well. As to size, I think most of the prints you'll see today are something in the region of 30 by 50 centimeters, but there's no real set size. Some of them are much smaller than that, and some of them are considerably bigger. And in those cases, it's actually quite difficult to find a piece of wood large enough to take the design. So if you look at this here, this woodblock is actually made from 2 planks of wood that have been joined together, and you can see, if you if you can look very closely here, there's a very fine seam running down the middle of that woodblock that she's holding there, where the 2 planks are joined. Okay, so you've got your design, you've got your woodblock, you paste the design face down on the woodblock, and then you cut through the back of the paper into the wood, and you carve away everything except your design using small knives, chisels and gouges like this. And as you can see there, your design is left standing proud of the wooden background. So you ink the design and you lay a piece of paper on top. So it's not stamped. You put the paper on top and then you rub the back of the paper to transfer the ink. So the ink's transferred by pressure, not by absorption. And there's a real skill to inking a block properly. If you don't use enough ink, you get a very faint, a very dry image. If you use too much, you get blotches all over the print, or even worse, the paper can stick like glue to the woodblock. And then when you peel it away, you'll tear holes in it. So if you look at this print, this is another door god from Eastern China. Right in the center of that picture, you'll see some unevenly shaped holes, and this is where the paper has actually torn when they've peeled the print away from the woodblock. Now, the simpler sorts of prints, they're just a black and white outline, but to make a multicolored print like this one, you need to cut a separate woodblock for every color. So this uses 4 colors plus black plus the original outline. So this print has actually taken 6 woodblocks. So here is the setup just to print the color red on that picture there. And obviously the every color has to match up very precisely with what's already been printed. Otherwise you'll get a blurred image. The color will be to one side or the other. And so registering the woodblock with the paper every time you print another color on it does take a bit of time, and it means that color printing with, as a process with woodblock printing is comparatively slow. Now the blocks themselves are made from wood. It's quite tough and resilient, but they do wear out. You can get something something in the region of 15,000 to 30,000 prints from a single woodblock before you lose a lot of the design. And this is quite a well-used block. This is the kitchen god and his wife. If you look at the dragons up at the top, you'll see a lot of the detail has rubbed off there, and this is a fairly heavily used woodblock. However, if you've kept some of your earlier prints that still crisp and have all the detail, you can actually use them to create a new woodblock simply by getting a new fresh piece of wood, pasting the print face down, and then cutting one as you did the first time around. And in this way, the same design can be passed down through generations. And there are certainly designs being printed in China today that originated a century or more ago. In the same way, if you've made a very commercially successful print, then a rival studio can actually steal the print from you simply by buying one of your prints and using it to cut their own blocks. So it can be very difficult to know where a woodblock print is from just from the design, because there's a bit of borrowing and blurring of boundaries there. In a wider sense, it's not really known exactly where woodblock printing started or when, although it was certainly almost certainly in China. The oldest dated example of a woodblock print is a copy of the Buddhist Diamond Sutra from China. This is an illustration from the scroll, from the woodblock printed scroll. And from the text, we know that this was made, I'll just get it right, on the 15th day of the 4th moon of the 9th year of Xiantong. And that's the 11th of May, 868 AD. But you can see that this design here is so technically accomplished that they must have been making woodblock prints for a long time before this one was made. And in fact, the very earliest datable print is another Buddhist text in Chinese that was found inside a Korean temple. And because of where it was found inside the structure of the building, they know that it must have been made around 750 AD, so about a century earlier than this one. And so woodblock prints were originally made and used for religious and also official texts. And this makes a lot of sense. If you've got a big bureaucracy, you want to make sure that all the different departments are getting exactly the same instructions, the same set of texts. And printing and woodblock printing is a good way of doing that, making sure that somebody hasn't got a copy that's been made by a scribe with a line of text missing or characters written incorrectly. But the industry that was for making public, illustrations for public sale, the sorts of prints I'm going to be talking about today, that sprung up during the Song dynasty, and that's 960 to 1279 AD. If you look at this painting, it's not a print, it's a painting by Li Song. He was working in the very early 13th century. And this is of a family enjoying themselves at New Year inside their mansion. If you look at the mansion wall down the bottom, there's an entranceway there. And on the entrance, you can see an open doorway with a picture of a military door god stuck up on it. And similarly, inside the main hall there, the doors have been opened up, and there's a civil door god pasted up either side of the doors. And this painting is often held up to be the earliest visual example of the use of woodblock prints in China. So this is the 13th century, and by the 19th century, just about every single town in China would have had a woodblock printing studio or two. They were churning out quite literally millions upon millions of prints every single year. And you would have seen them everywhere. You would have seen them on doorways to the buildings like here. They were used inside the home as decorations, either mounted on scrolls or stuck straight onto the walls. They were used in folk religious ceremonies. They were even used as sorts of newspapers. We'll cover all of this later. They were just everywhere. And the different workshops and the different regions came up with they developed their own artistic styles. And they marketed their products all over China as well. I know that in the early 20th century, there were shops in Beijing that were selling prints that had come all the way from Guangdong in the south, 2,000 kilometers away. Similarly, there were workshops in the Beijing area that were making prints very specifically for export to the Muslim northwest of China. That's 3,000 kilometers away. So by the 19th century, very, very big and busy industry. But unfortunately, from the the 1840s onwards, really, China entered a very sad century of foreign invasion and civil war that turned society on its head. Go to the town of Suzhou in eastern China, very beautiful place, canal town. And in the late 18th, early 19th century, this was really a hub of woodblock printing in China. It was one of the major centers for woodblock prints, very innovative place indeed. They were producing woodblocks like this, The Happiness of Fishermen. And this is my favorite woodblock print of all time. And it's not just the fantastically rhythmic design there with the billowing waves and all the details of the boats going in and out and the different methods of fishing and the incredible technical skill in carving a woodblock. This is quite a large woodblock, but there's still very, very fine line work there. But I also love it because over on the right-hand side of the print, you can see many examples of people fishing using tame cormorants. And you could see this in China right up into the 1990s. I saw it many times in southern China in the countryside, although I think today you'd be hard pushed to find anything like that. But anyway, Suzhou, where this print was made, almost completely destroyed in 1864 at the end of the Taiping Rebellion. And along with it went a lot of the woodblock printing studios. Some of them managed to set themselves up again at Suzhou, or they moved to safer surroundings at Shanghai. But you see an immediate drop-off in quality, and it's clear that a lot of the older woodblocks have been lost, along probably with a lot of the skilled older masters as well. And then from the late 19th century onwards, woodblock printing had to compete with the much faster, for color printing anyway, mechanical processes such as lithography that had been introduced from the West. And then the early 20th century, there's more civil war, the Japanese invasion, then the communist takeover and the Cultural Revolution, and all these things really put the nail in the coffin of commercial woodblock printing in China. Now, since the 1980s, there have been regular attempts to sort of resurrect the industry at various places in the country. Woodblock prints have made it onto sets of stamps, and they've even been granted intangible cultural heritage status. But the truth is, sadly, there just isn't the market anymore in China for these, and the studios can't produce the vast numbers, well, they can't sell the vast numbers that they need to in order to make a living. There are some that are still going, but these have really repositioned themselves as folk craft museums and now sell the prints as sort of pricey tourist souvenirs or collectible artworks. Okay, that's probably enough sort of background information, but if you could just keep some of that in mind as we go ahead now. I've chosen the following prints from my collection really to give the broadest idea of style, content, and interesting history and background stories. So it's not necessarily what you would have found if you'd gone into a print shop in China to buy some prints a century ago. Of course, my own preferences have entered into this as well, so I do apologise in advance if I've missed out anybody's favourites. I'm going to go straight in anyway with Nian Hua, the most popular types of Chinese print, New Year pictures, Nian Hua. And nowadays the term Nian Hua does get used as sort of coverall for just about all the old traditional popular prints from China, but I suppose it only truly applies to the bright, colourful and auspicious pictures that were put up at Chinese New Year to decorate the inside of the home. And as a result, they almost always wish for good health, prosperity and happiness. And many of them are rebuses, that is, they contain sort of hidden meanings through symbolic wordplay, iconography and puns, and I like decoding these. And this is quite a straightforward one. The Chinese text there says Daji, greatly auspicious, and this sounds very much like Daji, big rooster, as you see there. The rooster has it's an auspicious symbol in itself, but it's got a young boy on its back with a rui, a magic wishing wand. And so the general meaning of this print, I suppose, is wishing for the great good fortune of having sons. Now, this print's sort of naive but very bold design, and particularly the colours, the red, green, yellow and purple there, they're very typical of the studios at Zhuxianjian, and that's in Henan province, not so far from the old Song dynasty capital at Kaifeng. Zhuxianjian is probably the oldest surviving woodblock printing centre in China. It's been famous for its prints since, they believe, the 16th century, when the Jialu River, which runs through the centre of the town, was opened up as a transport canal, and this allowed the townsfolk to export their crafts on a much wider scale all over the region. In 2007, artists from Zhuxianjian held a workshop at Kaifeng Museum, which I was lucky enough to go to. They gave me a lot of tips on how to print, and I also bought a lot of woodblock prints from them. And this is another one. This is another hidden meaning print. It's slightly more complicated than the last one. The little insect-like things around the rider's head there are red bats, Hongfu, which is how you say, well, it sounds very similar to abundant good fortune. And then the rider is holding a tray, and on the tray is a Song dynasty magistrate, so an idea of a sort of position, and a deer. So deer can stand for longevity, but here it's more of a pun on the word for a deer, lu, and the term for an official salary. And this idea of official rank and the money that goes along with it is reinforced by the rider's robes, which are again of a top-level civil official, holding a ruyi wand again. Their horse is riding over some auspicious symbols. And finally is on a horse, ma shang, which is how you say coming quickly in Chinese. So if you put all of that together, you have something like a meaning like wishing for the speedy arrival of wealth, longevity, high rank, and abundant good fortune. Okay, so we're off now to probably the most famous place in late 19th century China for woodblock prints, Yangluqing. And that's just to the west of Tianjin city, about 130 kilometers southeast of Beijing. And this is the print I'm going to talk about. I bought this in the UK from a printing artist who bought it, I think, in Hong Kong and was clearing out a studio, didn't want it anymore. And it shows the story of the legend of White Snake. And this, for those of you who don't know, is about a scholar who falls in love with a beautiful woman, only to find out that she's in fact a snake spirit in human form. The scholar is kidnapped by a jealous Buddhist monk, but after a lot of adventures, the lovers are reunited and the story has a happy ending. The stories here is sort of told, you start right at the back in the center and it works more or less clockwise around the design. Now this print is very typical for Yangluqing. It's highly detailed. And certainly when you compare it with the previous prints from Zhexiangjian, they were quite naive. This is fairly realistically handled. It's also enormous. It's over 1 meter across. And all the original outline and the underlying colors of pale yellow and green, they've been woodblock printed. But everything else has been hand painted, over painted by hand. And this again is a very typical of the Yangluqing studios. As elsewhere in China, where you had these communities, whole communities that were printing, you had a very definite breakup of the different sides of the industry. So there were specialists who just prepared woodblocks. There were the artists. There were people who cut woodblocks. There were people who printed. Specialists to overpaint and to mount and present the pictures as well. So it was very, very rare for one person, although everybody would have had an idea of what went on in the studio and might have tried several different things. It was very, very unusual for anyone to be skilled in more than one aspect of this industry. The very largest woodblock printing studios in the region would have kept going all year round. The smaller ones would probably only get busy at New Year or the popular times when the prints were in high demand. For the rest of the year, they would have been involved in other trades. The artists would have been doing other things, maybe even farming. Right, so heading eastward slightly to Fengxiang in Shanxi province, and that's it's not so far from Xi'an with its famous terracotta army. For this print, or two prints in fact, from an illustration from that amazing historical epic, Romance of the Three Kingdoms. So again, for anybody who doesn't know, the Three Kingdoms was a period of Chinese history starting around 220 AD when the Han Dynasty collapsed and China split into three competing states, each one trying to overthrow the others and take control of the whole of China. The novel Romance of the Three Kingdoms was written about 1200 years after the event, so during the Ming Dynasty, but it's remained incredibly popular to this day, and it spawned traditional operas, TV series, films, famous proverbs, and even a couple of folk gods have come out of it. And this shows quite a well-known episode, the return to Jingzhou. As I recall, the southern warlord Sun Quan, he tried to lure one of his rivals, Liu Bei, from western China into a trap by offering his sister in marriage. But fortunately, Liu Bei went to his advisor, the very wily Kong Ming, and Kong Ming said, don't go straight to Sun Quan, go to see his mother first. So off Liu Bei went to Sun Quan's mother. And she was very impressed with Liu Bei as a suitor for her daughter, but she actually didn't have any idea this marriage had been arranged. And she was aghast. She realized that Sun Quan was using his own sister and her daughter as bait in a very dishonorable scheme. So Sun Quan was so embarrassed by his mother's anger that he had to allow the wedding to go ahead, after which the newlyweds escaped, which is what's shown here, and all of Sun Quan's plans were foiled. The Chinese down the bottom there says that it was this print, well, the picture was originally designed during the Ming Dynasty. The date given is about 1514, 1515 by the Lauren printing workshop. And this is a fantastic example of a woodblock print that the design was made, well, 500 years ago. And every time the woodblocks have worn out, they've carved new ones from the older prints. And so they've kept this woodblock in circulation now for 5 centuries. This has been passed down. It's a lovely example of that. Okay, so time for a complete change in location. We're off to Foshan in southern China, just to the west of Guangzhou, the provincial capital of Guangdong province. Used to be Canton, known as Canton, not so far from Hong Kong. Quite a well-known craft center. And this is the print involved. I suppose it could be called heaven-sent money pouring in or welcoming Liu Hai. And I couldn't really talk about Nian Hua without mentioning wealth gods, because they're such an incredibly popular topic. And this one shows the deity, the immortal Liu Hai appearing on his 3-legged money toad above a household at New Year. And the toad's, well, sort of coughing up valuables, silver ingots and gems, and all over a couple who are standing outside their house there while the servants collect the windfall in baskets. I mentioned right at the beginning that a typical color scheme of the southern prints is this heavy orange background. This doesn't have that, obviously, but the contrasting red and green is also very typical of woodblock prints from Fujian and Guangdong provinces. Now this print, if you ignore the seal stamps in red there, there's actually some Chinese just to the left of the center there. And those characters say by Jun. And Jun was Feng Jun, and he ran a woodblock printing studio in Foshan that was completely destroyed in the 1960s during the Cultural Revolution, unfortunately. And all his woodblocks were destroyed, but he managed to save some of his prints. Now, Feng Jun spent the rest of his life actually working in construction. And after his death in 1989, his son here, Fung Bingtang, he resurrected the business and using those, the prints that his father had rescued. And also he designed some new prints. Those are up on the wall behind him. Those are his own work. And out of necessity, Mr. Feng here was one of the very few people who genuinely mastered lots of different aspects of the woodblock printing industry, because he had to. There was nobody else to teach him. And I visited him in 2019 and had a bit of chat about the old days in Foshan, and also again bought lots of prints. So he told me that in the old days there were over 100 woodblock printing studios at Foshan, employing probably over 1,000 people, and they exported their prints all over southern China and into Taiwan, Hong Kong, and also through Southeast Asia, the Chinese communities there. But Mr. Fung Bingtang's studio was the very last one in Foshan. And very sadly, he died not long after I visited him. But his son and a disciple, a female disciple of his, I believe, have kept the business going. All right, so returning to northern China now, to another printing center. I hope I'm giving you an idea of how many there were across China, as a very ubiquitous trade in the 19th century. Here we go. This is Wuqiang in Hebei province. And this is the print I'm going to talk about. I actually bought it in 2016 at a flea market in Beijing. And it shows the story of Yufei, the great Song dynasty general and patriot who defended the country against the Jin armies, or the Zhechen. And it shows his early life, and it's arranged in sort of comic strip-like panels. It's quite a large print, actually, this one. And these comic strip sort of layout was quite typical of Warchief Studios. Anyway, on the left side is shows various things. Yufei and his mother being rescued from a flood and adopted into a wealthy household, where he shows early signs of righteousness by beating up a village bully, makes his first friends, and fights early battles. And then on the right-hand side of the print there's also a picture of him being tattooed with the characters for "serve the nation with the utmost loyalty." What's not shown here is the rest of the story. And for those of you who don't know, Yufei's success on the battlefield actually led to his downfall. The Chinese Emperor Jinzong had actually been captured by the Jurchen, and his successor Gaozong was worried that if Yufei was successful and rescued his older brother, he'd have to give up the throne. Or rather, his ministers were worried about this because they would lose influence and power. So on the point of victory, Yufei was recalled from battle, charged with some trumped up charges by these corrupt officials, and he was executed. But 20 years later, his reputation was restored, and a fantastic tomb of him was built for him. And in front of it were these kneeling iron figures of the corrupt officials who had denounced him, falsely denounced him. And these were in iron because they were there for people to throw rubbish at or spit on or even urinate on. And this isn't actually at his tomb. This is at a temple at that printing center, Zhexianjian, which was close to where he fought several of his campaigns. So Yufei is a sort of local hero there. Returning now to Warchief Studios, and this is another favorite of mine. And I bought it at the Panjiayuan Antiques Market in Beijing. And if any of you have been there, you'll know that it's notorious. It's a notorious place for people selling off these sort of dust-covered family heirlooms as genuine antiques, where in fact they're completely fake. They were made yesterday. But it does show that not everything that you find at the market is a completely fraudulent. It shows episodes from the Sanxiao Wuyi, which doesn't translate very well, but I suppose in English it would be the 3 heroes and 5 gallants or 5 knights. And it's a collection of stories about the life of Lord Bao and his valiant lieutenants. Now, Lord Bao, Baogong or Baozheng, he was a real 11th century Song dynasty administrator, and he was famous for his absolute impartiality and honesty. I think he even had a relative of the emperor's executed for corruption. After his death, he was deified as a judge in the afterlife, and stories about him circulated for centuries, and in the 19th century, in 1870, in fact, were gathered together in Beijing and published as the Sanxiao Wuyi. And what you've got here are 2 panels. I've joined them together, showing 10 episodes from the story, each of them set within a sort of numbered cloud. On the left-hand side, Judge Bao appears twice. He's got a big beard, dark robes trimmed with green, and there are other people from the stories, of course, as well. The Emperor Renzong, the Ding family, and other heroes and villains there. There are another 2 prints apparently that complete this this story, but I've never come across them. Okay, another printing center, another type of style. This time we're off to Weifang, or rather Yangjiabu, just in the suburbs of this town on the Shandong Peninsula in eastern China. For this one, and this was made in the 1970s. This print from a traditional design to celebrate 70 years of the Weifang Nian Hua print workshop. And this place worked to a very, very high standard. I've got several of their prints. You can see from the extremely accurate color registration and the fine line work there, very high quality studio. But due to something as banal as a copyright issue over the name, they were forced to close down, unfortunately. Anyway, this print shows the empty city stratagem. This is another episode from that epic historical novel, The Romance of the Three Kingdoms, and it's set as an opera scene. And what I love about the Three Kingdoms is that though it's a story of civil war, and it's yes, there are big battles and bloodshed and vast armies, and but it's not really about that at all. It's all about, every story is underpinned by this, I suppose, an investigation of the psychology of strategy and how you have to use an opponent's character and weaknesses in order to defeat him. And what's shown here is the empty city stratagem. And as I said, over on the left there, you have the master strategist Kongming sitting on top of the battlements of the city of Xichang, which he didn't have enough troops to defend against an army that was sweeping down on him. So what he did was he sat on the top of the walls playing his zither, whilst he got his men to dress as peasants and open the door in apparent surrender, open the city gates and sweep the road in front. Now, the invading general, Sima Yi, was a very cautious man, and he saw Kongming sitting there, and he knew how cunning he was, and he couldn't believe that Kongming would take such a risk unless he had some cunning plan up his sleeve. So he believed he was riding into an ambush. He stopped, turned around and fled with his army. And so Kongming fooled him completely and was able to evacuate the city and escape. And this is another print from Jiabu, but a different workshop. And this shows a lovely folktale, quite well-known nursery rhyme as well, about the rat family who are looking for the most powerful suitor for their daughter. And after considering all the options, they decide that the cats are the most powerful creatures. So off they go and arrange a wedding between their daughter and the cat. But as you can imagine, it doesn't go well at all. And the Chinese at the top there says something like, an unfortunate rat got married in town. The groom was a cat who swallowed her down. And this is obviously it's a fable, a cautionary tale about the dangers of social climbing. It's much better to stay low down and hidden than to stick your head above the parapet and risk bringing disaster down on your family. And this is a fairly straightforward depiction of the story, but there are other versions. So here's this one. Now I have to say straight away, this isn't Chinese, it's from Vietnam, but it's a direct copy of a woodblock print from Hunan province. And I've put this one in here. And this is the same story, but it's subtly different here. The wedding down below is actually going off as planned. And this is because the rats have bought off the cat with entertainment, with music and fish and birds to eat. And this, of course, is a comment on official corruption. In late 19th century China, it was probably not, you weren't able to get anything done unless you paid off an official. And the social commentary here sort of ties in with this next print, The True View of Sichuan. And for this, I'm going back to the studios at Wuqiang. Now, I've put it in here because it shows how Nian Hua didn't always draw on traditional folk stories and popular legends. They could also illustrate contemporary social history. So from the mid-19th century onwards, there was a huge power struggle in China between conservative and, how would you put it, modern factions, people who wanted to modernize the country, reformers. And the reformers eventually won, of course, because in 1912, the emperor was forced to abdicate and the Chinese Republic was founded. And this print came out around that time, and I see it as a sort of celebration, if you like, of the new China that had got rid of the past and was welcoming in all these new ideas from overseas, modern ideas from overseas. So you've got rickshaws from Japan, bicycles, trams, aeroplanes, telegraphs, traffic lights, foreign inspired clothing, and also foreign architecture, and a very foreign artistic technique as well. Linear perspectives in use there. And though this title is a true and complete view of Sichuan, it's not Sichuan, the province in southwestern China. It's Sichuan Road in Shanghai, which is one of the main roads, and presumably there you could see all of these things at the same time. But in fact, the background here, the cityscape, is actually copied directly from a print of Tianjin in northern China, so 1,300 kilometers from Shanghai. The black rooftop on the left side is actually Tianjin's fire station. And if you look down the road there in the center on the right, you can see Tianjin's bell tower just edging into the road. And this is because the studio that made this borrowed the design from, or rather borrowed is a polite way of putting it. They took the design, just the buildings, directly from a printer that had been made of Tianjin. So this is a good example of how you can never tell just by looking at a print where it's from. So this is a print of Shanghai using a cityscape of Tianjin, actually made by a woodblock printing studio in Wujiang. So 3 different places involved in this one print. Okay, I hope now that you've got a good idea of the variety of Nian Hua prints. So I'm going to leave them now for other types, and beginning with door gods or gate guardians, Mingshan or Hua. And prints, this is a fairly typical couple. They're from Jixianjian again. They would have been, these are 2 prints, they would have been divided down the middle, and they were pasted up. You'd put one either side of a doorway to protect a household from bad luck, really. And the most widespread story of their origin credits their invention to the Tang Emperor, just get this right, yeah, Taizong. He was in the early 7th century. Now, Taizong was troubled by nightmares of ghosts, so he got 2 of his most trusted generals, Qin Qiong and Yu Zhigong, to stand outside his bedroom during the night and scare away the evil spirits that were giving him nightmares. And this remedy was so successful that the idea of pasting up pictures of these 2 generals spread right around China. And as you can see, the 2 were deified as door gods. Yu Zhigong is on the left there, Qin Qiong is on the right, and actually Qin Qiong's picture was used as a postage stamp design in 2008. Now usually Yu Zhigong is shown with a completely red face. This is to denote his fierce martial valor, and Qin Qiong is shown with a white face. So that's more to do with wisdom and diplomacy, but here the artist has given them sort of 50-50 to balance the personalities out. As I said, these 2 became door gods, are known as door gods all over China, although sometimes their images are replaced by, in certain parts of China, by local heroes. But the designs are almost exactly the same. You actually have to ask local people who they are. It's not obvious. And you don't just get these military door gods, you also get civil door gods as well. Here are 2 civil door gods. And these 2 show 2 young, beardless men dressed in scholars' robes, holding ruyi wands and holding baskets of precious gems. And they're actually successful scholars in the imperial examinations. And the Chinese there says, come first in the imperial exams, come top in the imperial exams, rise ahead in the world. And obviously something very auspicious to put on the front door of your house at New Year, or even at other times as well. And you don't, there's a sort of blurring between gate gods and the next category I'm going to talk about, which I guess would be talismans or Hu. And these usually show fierce animals or exorcists. And these were again to sort of scare bad luck away, but they weren't always just put on the front doors of houses. They could be put up elsewhere in a house, maybe in a sick room, or even sometimes they were pinned to children's clothing. So let's start with Zhonghui, very well known, the ghost catcher. That he was so fierce that ghosts usually did their best to avoid him completely, and he's got his demon quelling sword. It's usually shown in this very dynamic posture, one leg up and accompanied by a red bat. And this design is also down to another Tang Dynasty emperor, Xuanzong, who apparently saw him in a dream, and this is from the description that he gave. Again, this is one of the very first woodblock prints I ever bought. Also came from Foshan, just west of Guangzhou in southern China, but I'm not sure which studio it came from. And this is another very popular China-wide image. Tigers usually are there to scare away illness, but they can also be used, or they used to be used as well, to guard against foxes coming into the house, and they were thought to trail flames from their tails and so could start house fires. Just before we move on, do bear in mind the sort of coin-like markings down the tiger's back there. Now, as an idea of how widely these prints were distributed, even in modern times in China, this one comes from Wuqiang in the northeast of China, but I actually bought it in Lanzhou, so quite a long way to the west. That's 1,300 kilometers, 1,500 kilometers. It doesn't look like it there, but that's just because China is a very, very big place. Now, tigers have a very strange position in China. Obviously, they were quite common in the country until the early 20th century. And of course, they're very dangerous, to human life. But their strength and ferocity also is believed to drive away evil spirits. So at least in art, anyway, tigers are popular guardian figures. I know we're just going into the year of the tiger as well. They're often associated with medical deities. People traditionally used to dress up their children in tiger costumes and even give them little tiger hats to wear in order to protect them against illness. And I suppose if you wanted to involve some wordplay there, there's a connection between the Hu of tiger and the Hu of to protect. Do you remember the coin-like markings down the tiger's spine? Well, there's also a money tiger ridden by one of the gods of wealth, Zhao Gongming. And this is Zhao Gongming. And this is another southern woodblock from Foshan, but this time it's from the studio of Warchief. Now, his prints were incredibly popular in Southeast Asia and Chinese communities in Southeast Asia, particularly in Malaysia, Singapore and Thailand, and he's probably better known there. The prints are more widespread there than they ever were in China. Here you go, another tiger. This one is being ridden by the Taoist patriarch Jiang Daoling, and this talisman is to protect against the 5 poisons, which are represented here by a snake, a toad, a centipede, lizard and spider dangling from Jiang Daoling's sword. Now, Jiang Daoling founded his Taoist sect, the Tianxia sect, in the 1st century AD. His followers were then dispersed across China, and they got together again years later in eastern China at a place called Longhushan, Dragon Tiger Mountain. And that's where the sect really got going. And by 1200 AD, temples on the mountain were the major hub of Taoism in China, and one of them, the Shanqing Palace, Shanqing made quite a lot of its income came from selling talismans like this. So the red markings at the top there are 2 seals of Jiang Daoling. The script right at the top is talismanic script. And then in the middle there, you've got the protective Bagua and Taiji signs. And the Chinese there says, the seal of the great Shanqing Temple, or Shanqing Temple, Shanqing Palace, Longhushan, Jiangxi Province. And these talismans were in highest demand for Duanwu, with the 5th of the 5th month, which aside from having the dragon boat races, also considered in China the hottest, most humid, most unhealthy day of the year, when diseases were rife and the 5 poisons were at the most noxious, and you needed protecting against them. Now, I really enjoy investigating the history of individual prints. It's not often possible, but I know from an accompanying letter that this print was made and bought in 1927 by the Reverend Halleck at Shanghai. And so here you can see how the story of this print stretches all the way across China, from the mountains in northern Sichuan where the Zhang Daoling and his sect originally formed, to Longhuashan in Jiangxi province in the east, and then to Shanghai, where the print was probably made. Because in 1927, temples in China were under a lot of pressure. There was a lot of civil unrest in China. And in fact, the following year, the government banned the worship of traditional folk gods. And this meant that the temples became open season, really, for all numbers of bandits and private armies. And the temples at Longhuashan came under threat in 1928. The abbots at Shangqinggong had to flee. And in fact, in 1930, the temples were destroyed. They were burned down. So that woodblock print was probably one of the very last ones ever issued in the temple's name. Now, staying in Sichuan, but to a different place near Fengdu on the Yangtze River, a place called Mingshan. And I'm going to, this next print is not quite a talisman, but I've included it because, like the last one of Zhang Daoling, I can connect it to a very specific temple at Mingshan. Now, Mingshan was is the dwelling place of Tianzi, I suppose the guardian of the afterworld, of the afterlife. And this is his temple at Mingshan, Tianzi Dian. And you can see his guardian lion outside the temple there has got a skull on its necklace. The recently deceased needed a passport like this to get past Tianzi's guardians. Without it, they might have been prevented from reincarnating and have to wander the earth indefinitely as hungry ghosts. And part of the Chinese here actually says that this has been issued in the temple's name, the temple at Fengdu, Tianzi Dian. Now, this is another quite a large print. It's about 1 meter long. And you might notice there's 3 white horizontal lines running across it. And this is because this woodblock of this size was made from 4 separate pieces of wood that had been joined together. And those white lines are the seams where the separate pieces of wood joined. Despite the fact this should have been burned at a funeral, or it was intended to be burned at a funeral, there's no name on it, and it was clearly bought as a souvenir. I got it at auction in the UK, and I've actually seen lots of these come up for sale over the years. So it must have been there must have been firstly a lot of them made, and they must have been quite popular souvenirs. This one is Buddhist, but there was actually a Taoist version as well made for that market too. So we're going to leave talismans now, but stay with religion, and we're heading to Beijing in northern China for a completely different type of print. In 2020, I bought a collection of 80 antique Duma, which are these small prints of folk gods that are used to ask favors from the deities in question. And these were often burned at, in ceremonies. And the name Duma means paper horse, and I think that's a very evocative name for something that's meant to sort of gallop off towards the skies, taking your prayer to the gods. This is the standard layout of a Duma, with the folk god is in the middle, sitting behind an altar table, and with 2 attendants either side. He's dressed in the robes of a civil official, and like the door gods, you get both civil and military versions. But the red nameplate at the top there's been left blank, and there's absolutely nothing in this print to identify who this deity is. And the reason for this is that there are thousands and thousands of deities in the Chinese folk belief, and a woodblock printing studio just couldn't possibly keep woodblocks of all of them. They couldn't store them, for one thing. So aside from the most popular gods, they kept designs like this that could be just given a separate name and then used for any different number of gods as the customer required, if there was a slightly more obscure god being asked for. Now these Duma, the paper horses, they were made and sold in bulk. They weren't expected to last long at all. So the printing qualities are rather rough and crude, but I don't think this detracts in any way from their attraction as pieces of folk art. And for myself, they've taught me an awful lot about Chinese folk religion by studying them. I could go on for an hour just about these, but luckily for everybody, I've whittled them down to just a few favorites, such as this one. And this stays with the standard layout of these Duma prints. But this is for a very specific god, and it's not just the nameplate at the top, which says medicine sage Wei, who was Wei Zizang. But there are also other things in the print that tell you that it's definitely this particular deity. On the altar table in front there's a dried up bundle of herbs on the right, and this is because he was famous for his herbal remedies. On the left, the black figure of 8 thing is a gourd, which was used by doctors to carry pills around in, also associated with Taoist alchemists. And then under the table, this isn't very easy to see, but there are 2 animals. And on the right-hand side is a dog that used to follow Wei Zizang around. And the other side on the left under the table is a tiger. As I said, they're associated with medical deities because their strength and ferocity frightens away evil spirits that cause illness. The next print, this is another very specific one, and it completely breaks with the traditional pattern. It's of the Lord of Thunder, Lady of Lightning. The Lord of Thunder is a monkey-headed, vulture-beaked creature on the top right, surrounded by a ring of drums that he beats with a mallet and chisel. Then the Lady of Lightning is in the middle, holding up 2 flaming mirrors. And the other character up there, the other figure, is a rain deity who is a vase of water which he sprinkles over the land with a willow twig. Underneath are 2 rain dragons being ridden by male and female deities. So this is all to do with weather, and particularly agriculture. Thunder's birthday was the 24th of the 6th lunar month, and farmers would have used a print like this to pray that he protected their crops from being destroyed by storms. And this is the heavenly archer, Zhang, or Zhang Yuanxiao, and yeah, he's almost always shown defending against the black heavenly hound, who's sort of flying away to the top left corner there. Now he's an archer, but he usually isn't shown firing arrows. He's firing pellets. I don't know if you can see, but he's actually holding a slingshot pellet in his fingers there. And this is because the black heavenly hound is believed to devour male fetuses in the womb or kill young boy infants. And you can say firing arrows is songzi, and firing pellets, I mean, songzi, and also sending children. So it's sending boys. So this is something of a fertility Duma, and possibly put up in a newlywed's bedroom, or possibly if a couple were having trouble conceiving, this could have been used in a ceremony. So the prints I've been talking about, the Duma I've been talking about, came from Beijing, but they were originally used all over the country. As far as I know, though, they're only used today in Yunnan province. And in 2018, I visited the studio of a 6th generation carver, Mr. Zhang Reilong, who lives just outside Dali in Yunnan province. Now, Mr. Zhang, his main business is making these deity prints, but he can't run his studio on that because they're so incredibly cheap to buy. So somewhere else I wanted to buy a couple of these prints that had caught my attention in a shop, and they laughed at me. They said, well, we normally sell them in packs of 100, and even those will only cost you 1 or 2 yuan, so we can't possibly just sell you 1 or 2. So while the bulk of his business is making these woodblock prints of gods for use in local folk ceremonies, Mr. Zhang can't sell enough of them to keep his studio going, and so instead he's opened it up as a folk craft centre and makes prints specifically for the tourist market, which cost a lot more. And this is one of them. This is another, it's a very local print, shall we say, because it's a bit of a pun on the local accent. So these paper horses in Chinese Duma, but with the local accent, it sounds like you're saying jiama, which if you translate back into Mandarin sounds more like armored horse. So here you have a print of a horse in chainmail galloping through the sky, and it's a bit of a joke about the local pronunciation. But there were actually armored horse prints made in the old days, but they would generally show a horse and then separately a suit of human armor. And they were talismans for protection on long journeys. The horse to get you where you were going quickly, and the armor to protect you. So this does have a serious meaning as well. A bit more so than this print. This is one of also one of Mr. Zhang's, Dushan, the god of gamblers. Now, Mr. Zhang printed these not on paper because they weren't meant to be stuck up or burned. This is printed on cloth, and Mr. Zhang showed me that this is so you can carry them around on in your pocket. He keeps one in his pocket all the time. So it's a sort of modern use for a derma, traditional derma, made by somebody with a bit of a sense of humor. Now, these two are not from Mr. Zhang's studio. They're actually from down near the Burmese border, from a place called Heshun. And they show the four gods of wealth down the bottom there, and the two twins of harmony. They're called He Si Shen in this print, which is more to do with domestic harmony, should we say, marital harmony. Across the rest of China, they're generally known as He Xian. But anyway, I was always told when I bought these two prints, I was told very, very emphatically, you have to display them as pairs all the time. And this is how they'd be used. This is up on the doors of a house. And this is at New Year, these would be put up to invite the wealth gods into the home, and also to hope for domestic harmony through the year. But I've also seen these put up in public transport, in taxis, and here above the door of a country bus. And this is presumably so that whatever journey you're making will be profitable, and also probably so if you've been on a country bus in China, so the customers won't fight amongst themselves and you won't argue over the fare you're going to get charged. All right, so finally, this is the last print I'm going to do, and also the last type of print. These are victory prints, De Sheng Tu. Now, the origin of this type of print actually comes from the 18th century, from a set of European engravings that were made specially for the Qianlong Emperor to celebrate his victories against the Tibetans and other tribes in Western China. But these woodblock victory prints, they date really from the middle of the 19th century to the beginning of the 20th century. So they were used over about a 50-year period. They always featured battle scenes, contemporary battle scenes. These were like news sheets. So they had a punchy tabloid-like title, a nice exciting picture, and you can imagine them serving sort of as news sheets to a largely illiterate Chinese population. So perhaps somebody who could read, if this was stuck up on a wall outside a house, or could be handed around a crowd, and somebody who could read could translate the title, and people could see our boys fighting a good victory. But I have to say that these victories are almost always fictitious. And very oddly, I found this in 2012 in a local jeweler's, while I was writing a biography of a British adventurer in China, a man called William Mesny, who actually served in the Chinese military during the 19th century. He traveled all over China, and in 1884, he was down on the Vietnam border just as a war was brewing between France and China for control of northern Vietnam. Now, inside Vietnam, there was a group of pro-Chinese guerrillas called the Black Flags, and they were headed up by Liu Yongfu. And Mesny later wrote a book about the war and about Liu Yongfu and the Black Flags. So wind forwards 10 years to 1894, and China went to war with Japan over control of Korea, very similar situation. And unfortunately, China lost, and as part of the war settlement, they had to hand the island of Taiwan over to Japan. And this didn't go down well at all with Taiwan's Chinese population, and resistance to the Japanese occupation was headed up by Liu Yongfu, who, since fighting with the Black Flags in Vietnam, had been transferred to Taiwan in a minor government role. And the title here is Liu Yongfu's Black Flags Defend Taiwan, victory by land and water. But as I said before, it's all unfortunately fake news. Liu Yongfu's forces were defeated and he had to flee to the mainland, actually dressed as a woman, aboard a British registered vessel. And just before I finish, I wanted to say that these victory prints, they were very up to the moment. They had to comment on battles that were being fought at the time. So a woodblock this large, it's another very big one, would have taken a long time to cut. And it's no surprise perhaps that this one has been recycled. It was first used about a year earlier than this with a different title. And it was used again, I've seen it used to describe a battle 6 years later during the Boxer Uprising in 1900. So it was obviously, if you had a battle scene to represent and you didn't have time to carve it, all you had to do was cut out the title, get a new piece of wood, carve a new name on that and stick it there in place, and bingo, you've got a fresh battle scene. Okay, well, that is the end of my talk. I do hope that I've given an idea of the scope and variety of popular Chinese woodblock prints during the 19th century in China, not just Nian Hua, but other prints that you might have come across as well. And that I've also given some idea of the history, culture and iconography behind these prints and the regional differences in subject matter. And I'm hoping that if you didn't know some of this before, it might allow you to have a look at woodblock prints in future, Chinese woodblock prints, with a more critical eye, and also that it, I hope my talk has sparked some interest out there for what I think are absolutely wonderful examples of a national art form. So thank you all very, very much indeed. I hope I've got all that across there.
Thank you so much, David. It's been really enlightening. Just the amount of content and the breadth and the entire scope that you've shared with us. It's really enlightening. Yeah,
I'm exhausted.
Yeah, so, we're gonna open up the questions. So for the audience, you can actually type your questions if you have any in the chat. So while they do that, I have some questions for you. So as you know, there's so many different types of traditional Chinese arts. There's like calligraphy, a jade cutting, or like even shadow puppets, and so So what drew you at first to Nanyang prints?
Well, I think the idea that I was already interested in woodblock printing, and when I first came across them, actually, I didn't really know anything about. I didn't realize that woodblock prints were made in China as well. And as I said, that as I started to collect them, in order to understand what it was I had and what I was looking at, I had to start looking at the culture, the woodblock printing culture, and this drew me into Chinese folklore because of the subject matter. So all the things I've talked about today. So really, they were something of they became for me something of a window into Chinese culture. And so I always see, I suppose, Chinese culture is like a giant ball of wool, and everybody gets attracted by a different strand. And as you pick away at it, you find that all the different strands are in fact interconnected. So by becoming interested in one topic, you can actually learn an awful lot about lots of different things that are apparently not connected to that topic, but are all drawn back to the roots of Chinese culture. So for me anyway, I will never, being a foreigner, I'll never understand everything there is to know about Chinese culture. So this is something that gives me an insight into things. So the more I study them, the more I understand, really.
I think you're being way too modest.
No, not
that. So you mentioned a lot of prints in your collection, and some you love more than others. Well, however, I was more interested in, were there any of the prints in the collection that was particularly tricky to obtain, or perhaps an interesting story that came along with it?
Well, in a way, I've sort of just picked them up when I've come across them in China. So they are difficult to find nowadays because although you do see them at New Year. I mean, the studios that make them do make them in reasonable numbers. But I think the thing I'm most pleased about, I think, is finding that Mr. Fung Bingtang's studio in Foshan. I knew Foshan beforehand, but and that their craft is known particularly for paper cuts, or it used to be. Now there's a huge series of martial arts studios there as well, but martial art museums there, and I think that's why a lot of people go there now. But when I visited Mr. Fung Bingtang, the immediacy of how endangered woodblock printing in China was brought to me, because he lived in a tiny, tiny island of traditional streets, and all around it were just construction was going on. Skyscrapers were going up. Huge holes were being excavated in the ground. There were cranes everywhere. And in the middle of it, there was this open air market, this huge traditional market with bundles of vegetables and grannies arguing over the price of bok choy and so forth, you know. So it's this very, very traditional scene. And in this street with a badly cracked, you know, pavement was this really last building that was still there, this last sort of semi-traditional building, which was his studio. And actually, you know, I was extremely tactless when I was talking to him. I did say, you know, you're surrounded here by construction. Are you worried that your studio is under threat? And he said, no, we're, you know, a protected ancient business. It said, you know, above the door, you know, protective old building. But, you know, you have to worry, really, because even the old areas of China, they tend to demolish everything and then rebuild them again as a sort of oldie worldy type place. But as far as I know, the studio is still going. I don't know if his workshop is in exactly the same place as it was, but I believe he had a female disciple who I've seen online since and still seems to be making prints. And I think his son, although he was an electrician, I think he had recently become interested in woodblock printing as well. So I'm hoping that that tradition is still going. But yeah, that was the most, I think the most sort of, I was very glad to have managed to see all that at the time. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of symbolic too, you know, being a traditional shop
within
like changing modern times.
Exactly, exactly. I mean, for the look of things, obviously old buildings, they're visually attractive and interesting. But obviously, to live in some of these buildings, they might be picturesque, but you know, there's no modern plumbing or electricity and so forth. So you understand why people want to modernize, and but it is a shame when you see the crafts themselves under threat as well, these traditions under threat.
Oh, we have a question from
excellent
from Wang Wunwai. So, is it difficult to preserve these prints, and would it fade with time?
Sorry, difficult to preserve the prints. Some of the older ones, the paper used, particularly for the Duma, it's very, very thin. It's like almost like tissue paper, and when it's 100 years old, it's actually quite, it's chemical free in a way because it's traditionally made, and it's quite resilient, and surprisingly for stuff that old, but it does get quite brittle, and you have to be careful with that. So ideally you keep them in acid-free conditions in plastic sleeves if possible. I have a few, well, I won't turn the computer around, but I have a few on the walls as well mounted. But yeah, they do get brittle over time. And I'm sorry, what was the second question? What are my favorites?
Oh, would it fade with time?
My favorite type, I think, are the pictorial sort that either tell a folk story, like the Lord Bao, the Bao prints, where there's a sort of cartoon-like picture. I quite like those, and also that picture, the happiness of fishermen. For me, that will always be my favorite print, I think, of all time. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the second part of his question was also, will the colors and ink fade with time?
Yeah. certainly if you, the older, before the, I think about the 1870s, they used very traditional vegetable-based dyes. And these colors, as long as you keep them out of sunlight, they hold the color very well indeed. There is a problem, though, that they do fade over time just because of the paper. After the late 19th century, you had modern dyes come in from Europe. And these tend to hold the color better, and they can, with the older prints, unfortunately, they become very unbalanced because the older colors, like blue, stay very, very strong, whereas all the others have sort of faded to quite subtle tones. So some of the prints do look a bit unbalanced nowadays, probably not what they looked like when they were made.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so we have another question. So just now you mentioned that the mouse wedding prints, it was actually a copy that you purchased in Vietnam.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So we have a question related to this. So have you ever obtained a Nian Hua from other countries apart from China?
Really, just from that one from Vietnam. I suppose they're made. I don't know of any printing studios outside of China. I'm sure there are. In the ones in Southeast Asia used to come from Foshan up until certainly in the 1950s. They were exported in colossal numbers from southern China into the communities in Southeast Asia. And nowadays, the prints I've seen overseas, as most of the ones we see in China, they're machine made, printed on glossy paper. I don't know if there are any artisan studios in, say, Malaysia or Singapore where they're still made in large numbers. So no, I've bought them in the UK, but they've been Chinese-made prints when they come up at auction. But I haven't bought them anywhere else apart from China and at auction in various places. Japan, actually, the Japanese were very early collectors of Chinese woodblock prints. So some of the best large collections of early Qing dynasty prints from the 18th century and before are actually in Japan, some of the largest collections. But unfortunately, they don't really come up for sale very much. Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah. Oh, hold on. We have thank you for sharing. We have another question, also from Wang Wen Wai. He asked whether anyone has ever experimented using 3D printing to recreate these printing blocks. So perhaps not just woodblock prints, but in a more modern format.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen wood blocks that have been cut by laser. And I saw these, actually the first time I saw them was in Yunnan, in Heshun, where the Twin Gods of Harmony print that I was talking about towards the end came from. There was a printing studio in Heshun in the early 20th century, and they still have a lot of the old blocks and they print them. But they were selling laser cut versions of the older blocks. I can't tell you how awful I think this is. Because for me, the whole process, no, one of the things about woodblock printing is that it is, every stage of it is a craft that involves a human being. So from the original drawing of the picture, to the cutting of the woodblock, to the inking, getting that balance between the wet and the dry exactly right on the inking, the positioning, the very careful positioning of the print so that all the colors print in exactly the right place, overpainting, all of this gives means that every single woodblock print varies slightly. Even if they're made at the same time from the same woodblocks at the same studio, every single one is subtly different. It's got a very human element to it. And when you replace part of that by machine process, you might as well just machine print everything, in my opinion. Now I've seen also screen printed woodblocks. Nowadays, there's a chap in China, he runs a studio in Yangluqing that produces what looks like the original designs, but they're all screen printed. And I've seen these also from studios in Wuqiang. And their argument is, well, we're keeping a design alive through this more modern technique. So we're modernizing a design technique. But to me, I might as well just buy a picture of this in a book. You know, the whole purpose of a woodblock print is this hands-on craft that involves, as I said, a different human being at each stage, and makes every single woodblock a different work of art. So yes, I have seen it, and I don't want to.
So it sounds like you're a little bit of a purist when it comes to this art form. So, pardon me if I were to ask, so it's more, for you, is it more of the process by which it's created? Well, what about the content that it depicts?
Yeah, I understand that by using other processes, you can preserve the content. So you can print, you just use modern printing techniques to reproduce a woodblock print, and in that sense, you are preserving a traditional design, which has, as you've seen, I think, there's a lot of history and folklore and Chinese culture embedded in these designs. So the designs themselves are worth preserving, because they give you a window into traditional Chinese culture in the 19th century. But as an art form, for me, it's important to preserve the actual process by which these are preserved. And this is why, yes, as you said, I'm a bit of a purist in that regard. I don't mean that the pictures themselves are not worth preserving for their own sake, because they are, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But I mean, that can be done in books, in theses, in books, in posters for bedroom walls and things. But for me, it is actually an art form, and when that art form vanishes, yes, okay, you could say, well, it's no longer relevant in the modern world, but it's a link to the past in China. It's woodblock printing is the earliest form of any type of printing. It originated in China, and China should be proud. Should be proud of this. This is something that really is worth preserving, even though it's outdated. But the technology spread from China into other places in the world. Caxton and his printing press in Europe, but 700 years earlier in China. It's something to be really proud of and preserve. Maybe just as an art form rather than as a sort of mass production, but it is worth preserving.
Thank you for sharing with us. We have a couple of questions just came in from Diana Lau. So can you show us the slide on the printing process? And is there any particular reason that the printing was done with woodblock below and the paper on top rather than the other way around? Because what we're imagining, sorry, yeah, go ahead.
No, I suppose this is a technical difference. If you're stamping a design, that's stamping. Woodblock printing always puts the paper on top of the print, and the ink is transferred by rubbing the back of the paper. So in Japanese, in European, in Chinese, any woodblock printing, that's how the ink is transferred. So the idea probably came out of stamping designs, probably textile designs. So going back a lot further, in fact, to the Han Dynasty, I believe there's tombs, the Han Dynasty textiles have been found in China with the stamping, where designs have been, say a design has been cut in wood, the wood's been inked, and then you've stamped it like a seal stamp across a piece of fabric to multiply the designs, to print a design on fabric. So this idea was known a lot earlier than woodblock printing, 500 years earlier at least. But woodblock printing is always done with the woodblock underneath and the paper on top, and the ink is transferred by rubbing rather than by having enough ink to stamp it onto the design. So it's just a technical difference, and it allows, well, in Japan it allows you to do a lot more. These techniques aren't used in China, but they use graduated color, say, down the background, so going from very dark blue to light blue, and this can only be achieved by putting ink on the block and carefully watering it down actually on the wood block, so that when you print it you get a graduated color, and this you can't do it by stamping. You have to do it by putting the paper on top. Yeah. So that, yeah, I'm sorry I didn't go back to the design there, but I know the one that is meant in that case. Yeah. Sorry, was there a second part to that question as well?
Oh no, it's more of a follow-up with the first question. Yeah, I think you answered that section already. So we have two more questions. One from Lin Wong. So what do you feel is needed to preserve the Nian Hua on your prints, your pictures? You alluded that despite it being recognized as an intangible cultural heritage, continuity is still a challenge. For example, the lack of commercialization and the succession of craftsmen through the generations. Yeah. So yeah.
Well, I think there's a lot of things involved here. I think museums in China are already preserving Nian Hua. So I believe this this whole exhibition that you're running is in cooperation with the Chongqing Museum, City Museum. And then there are museums in places like Tianjin. Yangluqing has got a fantastic, absolutely fantastic museum. And in Wuqiang as well, there is a woodblock printing museum. So the culture is preserved through museums. I think everything is being done. There is a bit of government support in this intangible cultural heritage. And every now and then there is this sort of resurgence of interest in woodblock printing. It seems to sort of come and go within China. And I think the traditional studios are doing what they can to preserve themselves. I think they have to reposition themselves in this sort of tourist and fine art market bracket, because otherwise there's no way to, you know, the idea of just mass producing and, as I said, selling these prints, they have to sell them at such relatively low prices if they're doing that they just can't sell enough of them to make a profit. The problem involved with all this is that obviously the popular designs are commercial and they can sell those. So this is what tends to be overproduced nowadays, to a point that I think, say with Yangluqing, which used to have an enormous variety of different types of print were produced there. And nowadays, almost all of them are just these fat baby prints, you know. And this is because they're popular. People want them. And obviously, you've got to give people what they want. But it is a bit of a shame that even the designs, maybe the older designs aren't being modernized. People aren't coming up with modern ideas. You can't, I suppose there's no point in reproducing sort of Qing dynasty designs that have no real relevance today, but there must be modern equivalents that could be made and which would prove popular and which are worth making.
Yeah, it's always a very difficult balance to make between, you know, preserving a certain art and also the value of which, the monetary value, the sort of heritage value, and versus the monetary value of it.
Yeah. Well, the monetary value of the really old prints, say from the 18th century, there are very, very few known. There's maybe a hundred odd prints known from the 18th century. And a couple of years ago, some came up at auction, a set of, I think, 20 prints, including that Happiness of Fishermen. Now, I bid for that, but I was outbid by a factor of 60. So those went for thousands. And a couple of years ago, some of them, well, in fact, just at the end of last year, an 18th century print went for something like 80,000 euros, you know, a single print. Because, you know, so there is a very, very fierce competitive market out there for old prints. The newer ones, though, the newer ones, of course, are quite relatively easy still to get hold of. And there isn't that competition. So you have two very different markets there. The older stuff is already in the hands of relatively wealthy collectors. And then there's people like me, that's just a dream, really. And we make do with the sort of more common prints, maybe from the late 19th century, early 20th century. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, well, we've already run past 3:30. We have one last question, and
certainly, yeah.
Let's have that as the last one. From Evelyn Ho. How many experienced woodblock carvers for this kind of woodblocks still exist in China now? So the artisans, how many of them are still, you know, working right now? And anyone involved in training these special skills nowadays in China, Japan, or other countries? So it's about, yeah, the dwindling numbers of artisans and also the question of continuity.
Well, I don't have any idea of the actual numbers. but I know there are woodblock carvers in Wujiang. In all the woodblock printing centers I've spoken about today, there are still people who are running studios that are making woodblocks. But I must say, most of the carvers I've met have been relatively elderly. Say, well, you know, I'm in my 50s now myself, so they're in their sort of late 50s probably. I haven't seen so many younger carvers. Again, it's not really, it's something that people might do perhaps as a hobby, but as a career, it's not going to earn you any money. And I know this is actually a big problem even in Japan. There's a Canadian in Japan who's been resident there for many years. He runs a site on YouTube. I can't remember the name of the site, but he's gone into this in big detail. And when he first arrived in Japan in the 1980s, again, there was quite a large number of older generation carvers. And then the numbers just vanished. And he has kept a core group of enthusiasts going. So he produces, he's a woodblock carver himself, and he has a big group of younger traditional woodblock carvers, this is in Japan, who create and sell work through his studio. So there are people who are still definitely making these, but I think increasingly it'll be the preserve of artists, rather than, say, woodblock printing families who would hand these down through the generations. It'll be more individual artists. And I don't think, I might be completely wrong here, but I think it's probably, there isn't much government support, say, to set up woodblock training centres. This is up to the individual craftsmen themselves to pass their skills on to a younger generation. And as I say, it's quite, as with a lot of modernizations in China, it's hard to, the older generation always find it difficult to pass these skills on to a generation which really see them as incredibly antiquated and unnecessary. But hopefully always there will be, you know, there's 1.4 billion people in China. There've got to be some there who are interested in enough to keep woodblock printing alive. But I sincerely hope there are, yeah.
Yeah. Hold on. I just come to my attention that we have an attendee that has raised his hand for quite a while. I didn't notice. So Fabian T, do you have a question?
Hi. Thanks for that.
Oh, hi.
I just want to hello. Thanks for the fascinating thing. I didn't enter right at the beginning, so I was wondering if this has been presented. Meaning, two questions very quickly. The first one was you mentioned the door gods, as well as the Zhonghui was from the Tang Dynasty. Is there particular reasons why these became popular from the Tang Dynasty? Was it because it was mandated, or for some reason it started then? And the second question: have you seen anything on Zhang Fei, as in Guan Gong, and and what do they represent in today's China?
Oh,
thanks.
Well, okay. So that first question, I'm sorry, could you just say the first question again? I did have it in my head, and I've just forgotten it. It was about the
yes, about why the door gods, in particular the Qin and the two door gods.
The story of the door gods, where it comes from.
Correct. And Zhonghui, why Tang Dynasty? Yeah.
Yeah. So actually, I think the door gods. There is evidence that the idea of door gods is in fact much older than that, and it doesn't go back to the Tang Dynasty at all. It actually originated almost in prehistory. I think the idea of the idea of having door guardians, door gods, goes back much further. I don't know exactly why the story that I gave about the Tang Dynasty emperors, several of them, in fact, being interested, coming up, the tradition being attributed to them. I don't know why it became popular during the Tang Dynasty, but it's possible that as woodblock printing arose, the idea of maybe during the Song Dynasty, in fact, when woodblock printing was really getting going, that they started printing these door gods to put up, and that this story was then circulated sort of apocryphally, that it actually came from the previous, great dynasty, the Tang Dynasty. So it was a way of sort of connecting with the history of the pre-Yuan history of China. So that the idea that the door gods, dated back to the Tang Dynasty actually is a fallacy anyway. It's much, much older than that. And sorry, the second part of your question was.
Oh, the second question was there any wood print of Guangong, and is it only about his martial prowess, or there's more to it than in the wood carvings for Guangong?
Well,
is it also for
Guangong particularly? Yeah, Guangong. Yeah. Yufei, the woodblocks I've seen from about Yufei, actually the Zhixianjian Studios produced quite a lot of Yufei prints because he fought in the area around Kaifeng where Zhixianjian is. So I didn't want to overburden the talk just with prints from there, so I included one from Wuqiang. But yeah, I think traditionally he was many old martial heroes were included in Yufei and Guangong. There are lots of prints of Guangong indeed. So the studio that produced the one of Zhang Daoling on riding the tiger, I've got prints also from Shanghai, also collected by the Reverend Halleck of Guangong. So they're also very, very popular prints, put up for all sorts of reasons: the martial prowess, the god of wealth aspect, and also the god of learning aspect with Guangong as well. So Guangong, the cult of Guangong was popularized, I believe, during the early Qing dynasty because the Manchus wanted to associate themselves with a fully Chinese deity. And he was already a Chinese hero. So they promoted the cult of Guangong themselves, and in an attempt, if you like, to become more Chinese and be accepted as the rulers of China. So Guangong's cult became very popular during the early Qing dynasty, and is still so, is still so in China, even more so, obviously, today. So he's everything. He's the god of wealth, the martial aspects, and also occasionally as a god of learning as well. So does that answer the question? You do get woodblock prints of him?
Yes,
yeah.
It does. Thank you very much.
Oh, you're very welcome indeed.
All right, I think that's all the time we have today. Thank you everybody for joining us today, and also a very big thank you to David for. It's probably 7 a.m. there now.
Yeah, well, so, yeah, 7:45.
Yeah, 7:45. Yeah. So I hope everybody has a wonderful time today, and we look forward to having you in the next public talk that we have. Thank you, everybody.
Well, thank you. Thanks, everyone. And thank you very much for setting all this up.
Thank you, David.
Okay, bye then.